Welcome, sports fans, to the Week 11 Steel Scorpion Sports Podcast. Unfortunately, Barry White was unavailable to join us this week, so you're back to your regular hosting duo of Jeff Miller and Mark Heflin. So, signing in from San Diego, this is Jeff Miller.
And from San Jose, Mark Heflin, I no longer have the Barry White baritone frog voice going on this week, so I'm back to normal.
It was nice to have a guest host on the podcast, Mark. I'll admit I was kind of getting tired of talking to you, but welcome back. And we'll just jump in right away so we can get this podcast moving along. And we'll open with our typical, how did Vegas do this week?
Well, people have been saying that this is the year of the underdog. At least that was the declaration by some people at the beginning of the season, and it definitely has not been true through week 10, but the week that everyone had been waiting for. So if you thought this was the year of the underdog, then week 11 was your week, because in week 11 the favorites were 4 up and 9 down, bringing the year-to-date total. The favorites are ahead 78 to 76 with 4 ties, so pretty much right at 500. And then the overs this week were 3 up and 10 down, so 10 of the 13 games were kind of the number. One of the 3 overs barely squeaked over. That was Kansas City won 24 to 20. To the math, that's 44 points. The over was 43. That one just squeaked by. So again, 10 of the 13 games under this week, bringing the total now. The overs are still ahead for the year, 81 to 77 to 1. But this week definitely kind of brought things back closer to 500.
And what about our primetime games? I know we haven't had the Monday night game yet. We're recording on Sunday night this week. But we had a Thursday night and a Sunday night game. And as we know, the overs on the primetime games had just been hitting it out of the park.
The Thursday night game went under. It was a low scoring 22 to 9 game with only 2 touchdowns. It was kind of not a good game to watch, kind of like a lot of Thursday night games this year. And the Sunday night game was not good to watch for different reasons, if you happen to be a Colts fan. But that game did go over. I think the over, the final number was around 58.5 or 59, depending on where you happen to be getting your action. But the final score was 42 to 20, so it got to 62. It got over. Al Michaels had a nice little subtle reference, if you happen to catch it, when the Patriots scored to make it 42 to 20. He says, well, this game isn't officially over, but it's over in other ways, if you know what I mean. So, good old Al Michaels putting in the gambling reference there. So the primetime games this week were 1 under, 1 over. I think, I have to check my numbers, but I think the year-to-date totals now are 25 up and 7 down as far as the overs go.
Pretty impressive. And I have to say, I was with Al completely when he said this game is over. And I mean, over in other ways. And I said, yes, Al, yes, it is, thankfully.
Yes, if you happen to have money on the over, which we may or may not have had accomplished, then yes, that reference definitely made more sense.
Correct. So great update from Vegas. Does seem like they seem to know what they're doing, hitting those favorites and underdogs at such a close clip. I guess they do build those large casinos based off of our losings, not our winnings, which is very disappointing. But be that as it may, let's roll right into our NFL games Week 11 update. So why don't we start with the pain and agony that was the Sunday night game, Mark. We both, being Colts fans, were hoping for a different outcome, although I will say the Patriots +3 seemed like taking money from a baby or just free money from the street. So I will say that the final outcome wasn't completely disheartening because, as we talked about last week, if your team is a 2, 3, 4-point favorite in a big situation like Indy versus New England, you can put in the bet on, say, New England. If your team blows them out, you're still going to be happy. If you win the in-between, where your team wins but by a small margin, you're doubly happy. And if your team loses, as the Colts did, at least there's some small measure of satisfaction you get from having placed a good bet.
True, yeah. We did mention the emotional hedge last week, and it's a good thing, I guess. I guess it's a good thing that placed such action so that there is at least some small consolation, because on the football field, on the game itself, was not very promising for the Colts. We somehow turned Jonas Gray way into, I think, at this rate, I think he's probably this year's AFC football running back. The Colts kind of do this. They have a lot of running backs. As you and I know from having watched many Colts games over the years, our run defense seems to be a continual problem. No matter which regime or head coach we're under, we can't seem to stop the run. Although that random Super Bowl year, again, we're bad against the run during the year, and then all of a sudden during the playoffs, we were lights out. I don't know what happened. We were bad during the run during the year, and then we faced the Chiefs with Priest Holmes, and even though they went all over us, somehow the whole playoffs long, we stopped people. But tonight, same old problem. Stopped, I think Jonas Gray ended the night with about 375 yards and 15 touchdowns. So
Wait. He's no Melvin Gordon.
He is no Melvin Gordon. This is true.
But you were correct. The Colts' run defense, porous, holy like the Pope, more holes than a sponge, whatever silly colloquialism and bad phrase you want to use. But wow, it was sad for the battle of first place teams to end like that, because the Colts showed that they're probably not ready for prime time yet when it comes to the playoffs. That's disappointing in Luck's third year. But the defense just isn't there yet. And on the flip side, New England has pretty much sealed up the number one seed in the AFC, because if you look across the divisions, they already hold a tiebreaker over Denver, Indy, and Cincy. So they've beaten all the other division winners. And Mark, I think you know the count, but it was pretty much something like 22 points against the Colts tonight, a similar 22 against the Broncos in Foxborough. I think a few more, like 26 or 27 against the Bengals in that Monday night beatdown. So I think they're sitting at about 70 points as the margin of victory against the three division leaders.
Yeah, 70 points against the Bengals, the Broncos, and the Colts. And that's impressive no matter how you slice it. 2 of those 3 games were at home, but still they have a 70-point margin in 3 games against the 3 other division leaders. And like you said, the bonus of that is that they have tiebreaker. So I think we can pretty safely say, barring a collapse in the last few games, that the AFC playoffs look like they will be going through New England this year. Now it's just a question of who's going to have that other bye week.
Yeah, and when you think about that, Denver has the tiebreaker over Indy, but Kansas City is right on Denver's heels now in the division, so there's still a chance there. And even the Bengals, they righted the ship this week with a win in New Orleans, so there's plenty of time left with 6 games to go where they can make a run and try and get that second seed as well.
Yeah, speaking of the Bengals, the AFC North is just crazy. Look at the scenes right now. We're recording this on Sunday night. Pittsburgh still has to play on Monday night, so they'll kind of throw this off a little bit either way, whether they win or lose. But as of right now, when we're recording this, the Bengals are 6-3-1. Steelers are 6-4. They were 6-4. Baltimore 6-4. That is about as close as you could possibly have a division be in week 11.
Yeah, and that's really impressive when you consider everyone's over 500 as opposed to the NFC South, where when everyone loses except for the winner of the Atlanta-Carolina game, I guess Tampa Bay won, but I've discounted them, although I guess I shouldn't, because with 2 wins, they're only a few games out of first place.
That's not even a few, just 2.
Yes.
2 games out of first place.
I should not have written them off so quickly, because the 2-8 Buccaneers could easily go on a 2-game winning streak and suddenly be tied for the division lead. But you mentioned the AFC North. Everyone's above 500. The NFC South, no one is even remotely pushing 500. That is what we like to call good.
The last place team in the AFC North is a full 2 games ahead of the first place team in the NFC South.
Bad, and worse. That is the NFC South this year. But those, the Sunday night game wasn't the only exciting game. I know we touched on a couple there, but there were some surprising outcomes this week too, didn't you think? Because I clearly would not have pegged New Orleans to be losing at home to Cincy. I probably wouldn't have said that Cleveland would lose at home to Houston, although I'm not 100% sold on Cleveland. But there were a couple other big-name profile upsets that I think you wanted to touch on.
Yeah, we talked about how a lot of the division winners coming into today lost their game. So coming into today's games, Philadelphia was leading the division. They lost. Detroit was leading the division. They lost. The Saints were leading the division. They lost. Arizona was leading the division, and they were playing another division winner. Arizona won. New England, Indy, similar matchup. 2 division winners playing each other, so Colts lost and New England won. Cleveland was leading the AFC North going into today, and they lost. And Denver was leading the AFC West today, and they lost. So quite a shakeup in the standings with all these teams losing. And we talked briefly about the Saints losing. I think we have committed a crime here. We buried the lead. Clearly, what we should have opened the podcast with. It's been all over the highlight shows today. There was even an article on it on ESPN. The video has pretty much gone viral. I think this is the lead story of Week 11. I don't know if you noticed or not, but there was a woman at the Saints game that a Jermaine Gresham had to throw her the ball, and a Saints fan leaned forward and took it, and it's just making all the headlines today. It's clearly the lead story in the NFL for Week 11.
Yeah, I saw it. The NFL Red Zone was kind enough to cut away to that right after the Gresham touchdown, and they showed that. They rewound and showed back the Saints fan stealing it, and you see her actually begging for the ball later, and he won't give it to her, so it's quite humorous. But I think you might have just buried the real lead as you went through those division winners losing. You kind of glossed over a couple of the games, which I think we'll touch on more, like the Detroit-Arizona game. 2 division leaders, great, in the Green Bay-Philly game. But then at the end, you just kind of mentioned, in Detroit, or in Denver lost. Who did Denver lose to?
The mighty St. Louis Rams, including Jeff Fisher must have known what he was doing when he changed quarterbacks because, this new guy, Sean Hill, he must be really, really good.
Well, as I recall, Sean Hill was a quarterback before in the NFL, not only in St. Louis, but in San Francisco, and isn't very good. So good for Sean Hill, and good for Jeff Fisher for making the change, and good for the Rams. But wow, is that an embarrassment? And again, that more or less wraps up the number 1 seed. When you're Denver, and you already know New England has the tiebreaker on you, you can't stumble in any of these games against lesser teams. And for whatever reason, I think injuries may be part of it, but Manning, he was okay, but they got 7 points. So Peyton Manning and a Peyton Manning-led offense with all those weapons, you can't put up 7 points. That's just unacceptable, and you can't really expect to win, right?
Yeah, I mean, like you said, 7 points for the Broncos offense. Even don't, so it's not like there was any kind of weather conditions going on. I think, a couple of the problems. One is they had no run game. They had 10 rushes for 28 yards in the entire game. Honestly, that's not good. And then there's some injury issues. Monty Ball got injured before he even took the field. It looks like he had a couple targets, but no carries, no receptions. But I saw somewhere where he was injured and did not get back into the game. Emmanuel Sanders took a horrific hit. Looks like he definitely got a concussion. Might be out next week. So he was out for the rest of the game. And then Julius Thomas, their all-world tight end, had an ankle injury and missed the game as well. But there's still enough weapons there. You still have Demaryius Thomas. And then you still have Wes Welker, who is clearly not the same player he used to be. And then beyond that, actually, it starts to look kind of worse. You have C.J. Anderson, you have Andre Caldwell, Jacob Tamme. So definitely a decline of weapons. Peyton Manning didn't have a horrible game. Threw a couple interceptions, one of which was, I think, tipped or almost tie with the receiver. But, not a good game, and definitely ruined their chances for the number 1 seed.
Yeah, so that was an embarrassing performance by the Broncos, as I said. When you're fighting for the number 1 overall seed in the AFC, you can't have games like that. And the only benefit to them is if they would somehow see New England stumble down the stretch and be able to pass them, at least their losses are coming outside of the conference if they get in a conference tiebreaker against someone. So I guess that's the small silver lining they can point to out of this. But another game, as I mentioned, or 2 other games really, were some division leaders, some other playoff-bound teams we think. Those games turned out to be either a little more exciting or actually a little more eventful. So I think I'll throw you first, Mark, up to the frozen tundra, and frozen it was, and Green Bay's demolition of Chip Kelly and his super fast offense.
I watched a good portion of this game. So in the afternoon, I was pretty much completely ignored San Diego, Oakland, because I want no part of any game that Oakland is involved in. I think you have the cold spread Oakland, I would find something else to do because I don't want nothing to do with that game. But so I was bouncing back and forth between the Arizona-Detroit game, which is not as exciting. That game was 14-3 at the end of the first quarter, and the final score was 14-6. So you can do the math and figure that there were 3 points scored in the last 3 quarters. Okay, that's an average of 1 point per quarter. Not exactly the most exciting football game. So I spent most of my time actually watching the Green Bay Eagles game, and Green Bay is firing on all tied with the Lions for first place in that division, and they looked really good today. Aaron Rodgers, obviously, what can you say? He's really good. They've got a couple great weapons with Cobb and Nelson, and defense scored as well today. They had 2 defensive touchdowns. Peppers and Hayward on the interception return and the fumble return both scored. So Eagles got behind quickly, just couldn't catch up. Sanchez did not look as good as he was previously last week against Carolina, as you might suspect. But have a good battle brewing in the NFC North over these last 2 weeks with the Green Bay and Detroit now both getting 7-3.
Yeah, now Detroit does own the tiebreaker from the win earlier in the season, but obviously Detroit still has to go to Lambeau, so that'll be interesting. I saw some stat on Aaron Rodgers. He doesn't throw interceptions at Lambeau. So the fact that he doesn't throw any interceptions at Lambeau makes it really hard to beat them up there, especially when he's throwing so accurately to Nelson on the outside and Cobb going across the middle and finding guys like Quarles. And Eddie Lacy is scoring touchdowns every week now. As an owner, you probably already know that. But when you get Eddie Lacy going, mostly it's been in the passing game, which is odd, but it's nearly an unstoppable juggernaut of an offense. And when you get ahead, that defense can really play to its full potential.
Yeah, that looks really good. In fact, if I were to think of the kind of NFC top teams, I would say probably it's the Cardinals and the Packers right now. And, the Cardinals have the inside lead on the number 1 seed in the NFC. They're not only at 9-1, they're 2 games ahead of all other teams, but they've got the tiebreaker on everyone as well. Philadelphia is 7-3, they've already beat them, so they have the tiebreaker. Dallas is 7-3, they beat them, so they have the tiebreaker. Detroit 7-3. They just beat them today, so they have the tiebreaker. We don't even mention the NFC South. And then Green Bay is 7-3. Arizona and Green Bay don't play each other this year, but all of Green Bay's 3 losses are within the conference. And Arizona has no losses in the conference because their 1 loss is at Denver. So in a way, they pretty much have the tiebreaker on Green Bay as well. So unless Arizona completely falls apart in the last 6 weeks of the season, which with that defense does not seem likely, we can pretty much at this point say that the AFC players are not to Cleveland and the NFC players are not to Arizona.
It's pretty crazy that we would say that. And also, it's crazy because the Super Bowl this year is in Arizona. And I heard a stat during that game, which apparently you didn't watch, the Detroit-Arizona game, that the Super Bowl hosts, we know no team has ever actually played in the Super Bowl that they have hosted or at their stadium, so when their stadium was hosting. But in all those years as well, very rarely does that team even make the playoffs. And if you think about it, being a Colts fan, you'd remember this, Mark. A couple of years back, Indy hosted the Super Bowl. It happened to be the year that Peyton Manning sat out. The Colts didn't make the playoffs. So the Superdome, New Orleans was bad historically when the Superdome used to host every few years. Miami was bad for a long stretch when Miami had it. San Diego was bad. So I believe they said something like only 6 times does that team even make the playoffs that's going to host the Super Bowl. So I think Arizona on its way to busting that, and potentially, if they get the number 1 seed, potentially being the first ever host in their own building for a Super Bowl. That would be pretty crazy. The Drew Stanton-led Cardinals trotting out onto the University of Phoenix field to host the Super Bowl. Sounds pretty much like you predicted before the season started.
Yeah, that would be a huge story. And I know we're getting way ahead of ourselves here because things can change from week to week in the NFL. But looking at the stands right now, kind of the picture of the NFC, I would look forward to if the NFC Championship game is the Packers at Arizona. That would be a pretty good game. You'd have the high-powered Green Bay offense against the stout Arizona defense. But if I think I would take Green Bay. Just if you look at the quarterback matchup, NFL's the quarterback in the league. If I have Aaron Rodgers on one side, Drew Stanton on the other, I'll go with Aaron Rodgers.
Yeah, you're probably right in that regard, but I would say that the NFL is a coach and quarterback league. So on the flip side, would you take McCarthy, who's been okay, but there are some people that question his X's and O's and some of his motivation techniques, or would you take Bruce Arians, the deep ball loving, go for the jugular any chance you get, rowdy, Kangol wearing, fun loving coach? I think I'll throw Arians the advantage there.
I would take Arians over McCarthy, but edge of Arians over McCarthy is much smaller than the edge of Aaron Rodgers over Drew Stanton.
Don't you sell Drew Stanton short. Michigan State, go Sparty.
Yeah.
So, as we talked about last week on the podcast, he did get his revenge in a revenge game against the team from the state closest to his rival school. However, I phrase that. It worked. So, good for Drew Stanton. Way to
Not
go.
only that, but he actually used to play for the Lions. I think he started his career with the Lions, so it's much more of a revenge game.
Did he really start his career with the Lions, or did he just show up to camp one year for the Lions? But either way, yes, revenge. But good for Drew. Good for the Cardinals. But as we said, that was one battle of first place teams. The Sunday night game, a battle of first place teams. And again, Mark, you mentioned first place teams had a horrendous day. And I think the morning games were wrapping up and no first place team had won. I mean, be that as it may, that the Saints were a first place team. They did lose. And you saw the Browns go down. And I don't know if you caught any of that game, but it was a thrilling, high-scoring affair. I think Cleveland put up 7 points. J.J. Watt scored a receiving touchdown, which of course now means that ESPN has made him their player of the week. I wouldn't be surprised if Peter King mentions him in the Monday Morning Quarterback as his offensive player of the week or something. We've got to get over this, okay? He's really seems like a good player. He hustles all the time. That's great. But just because he lines up and catches a diving fade, first, why are you not throwing it to Hopkins or Johnson? But we'll leave that for fantasy owners to debate and grieve about later. But really, you throw it with some linebacker covering him that doesn't even expect to throw. I mean, why wouldn't it be Costanzo from the Colts? He caught a touchdown and did a crazy dance. But he won't get mentioned in any of the articles, but J.J. Watt will be mentioned.
Well, you stole my thunder a little bit there with the Costanzo, and I know no one wants to hear kind of my bad beat fantasy story, but as it turns out, I really considered starting J.J. Watt and Anthony Costanzo in my flex spots this week, and I just I crunched the numbers with some of the other players, and I left them on my bench, and sure enough, they score. I couldn't believe it.
Yeah, but they probably didn't outscore your starters too much that you can use a mulligan on them since it was their only catch.
True, but it's just you see them scoring the sling of dogs.
Yeah, and in TD only leagues, I mean J.J. Watt and Anthony Costanzo are awesome this week. But let's get over this offensive and defensive lineman scoring. Let's focus on really what does have a fantasy impact from that Browns and Texans game is how pathetic the Browns offense looked. Although Hoyer actually had a career high in passing yards, they couldn't punch anything in the end zone. They don't have weapons that can finish. But Mark, I think next week they might, because barring a second suspension or resolution to some of the outstanding DUIs and other misdemeanors that have been charged, I believe Josh Gordon, yes, that Josh Gordon, will be back in the Cleveland offense next week, barring any secondhand smoke issues between now and, I believe, Thursday.
Yeah, you mentioned potential resolution issues with other things. I think probably the biggest potential issue, what you just touched on, is that you're giving him another 6 or 7 days to potentially screw up. He might go out and do something this week that could get him some suspension for based on his past. But we'll see. We'll give him the benefit of the doubt. We'll say that he's learned from his errors. He's ready to contribute to a playoff contending team. I know that I have Andrew Hawkins in one of my leagues and actually left him on my bench this week. I might have actually missed my last chance to start Hawkins because with Gordon back, I think Hawkins becomes much less fantasy relevant. He may still have some relevancy. And, maybe actually in some situations, Gordon gets so much attention that Hawkins actually gets some passes. But, with Gordon back, you have to figure that he'll be the number one target going forward for the Browns, and especially if you've had him on your roster all season, if you're one of those that drafted him back in August or early September, or picked him up in whenever it was mid-December or mid-September, when the news came out that he would be back this year. If you've been holding on to him for this long, obviously you're going to start him from this week 12 going forward.
Well, let's just hope, since neither one of us seems to own him, that maybe the NFL decides to give him a couple more games just to clear up all those DUIs, or maybe he just doesn't come back and perform as well. Because honestly, he hasn't been around for football-related activities, so it's not like you can just step in off the street and catch 100-yard games and 2 touchdowns, right? I mean, you haven't been hit since the end of last season, is my guess. So I would think that's not something you just jump right back into. I mean, on a similar front, we have Adrian Peterson's hearing going on Monday. Maybe resolution on his status on that commissioner exempt list. Will he be reinstated? Will they put an additional suspension on top of it? But even if they bring him back, I mean, you don't expect him to be the old Adrian Peterson from the drop of the first game, do you?
For most running backs, I would say no, and it's probably still the case. But if I recall correctly, Adrian Peterson, when he had that ACL injury a couple seasons ago, which I think he sustained in December, and then he was ready for game one of the following season and had a great game one, and then went on to rush for 2,000 yards. I think Adrian Peterson might be a little bit different than most running backs, either physically different or just wired different mentally. You'd have to think it'd be a little bit of a, kind of getting back in the groove since he hasn't been practicing with the team or anything, but clearly he's the same situation as Gordon. If he's on your roster and they clear him to play and he's on the team, you're starting him. I don't see how you could possibly leave him on your bench.
Maybe. I would say that if you got that far, let's say you already feel like you're in the playoffs and you got him to maybe hope that he could contribute to your playoffs, maybe you could let week 12 slide by without it and then get him ready for the playoffs and put him back in your lineup. But yeah, it's going to be tough for those owners if Peterson gets reinstated and if Gordon is reinstated and both are cleared to play. It'd be tough to leave him on your bench, but you could be setting yourself up to take out whomever you've been using. And if you're in playoff contention, then those guys must have been contributing something. So you're taking those guys out and you're putting in the home run hitters that you expect to produce, but maybe have some rust. And there's no guarantee that first week or two isn't going to be a big disappointment.
Well, maybe it's just speculation on my part, but in our still scoring leagues, I don't know Josh Gordon or Adrian Peterson, but I do know that week 12 is the last week of our regular season. The multiplier is only run through the regular season. At this point, you already multiplied 11 other players. You're probably starting to have a little bit of nitpickings as far as who you're going to multiply this week. If I were the owners of those players, I would probably not only put them in my starting lineup, I would multiply them because obviously you haven't multiplied them yet, and this is your last chance for you to do so. And if you're going to put them in your starting lineup anyway, I'm not going to be surprised one bit to see them multiply this week.
And that's why we call you Riverboat Ron. Or maybe that's someone else. But you are Kenny Rogers of this podcast. You're the gambler. That seems risky to me, but good luck with that strategy to the owners of Adrian Peterson and Josh Gordon if they choose to follow that strategy. So with that, Mark, I think we've more or less touched on all of the topics for Week 11. Any other juicy tidbits you wanted to throw out there before we move on?
Yeah, actually, I'm going to touch on a conversation from last week real quickly. If anyone didn't listen to last week's podcast, we did a rankings of all the triplets, QB, running back, receiver combinations from all 32 teams. And I had the Broncos number 1, and I think you had a number 4. And you gave me some grief for that, and you said that they did not have the best combination of triplets. I think you may have had the Steelers number 1 with Roethlisberger, Bell, and Brown. And I conceded that, okay, in totality, or if you look at all 3 of those, they're probably better maybe in total than the Broncos simply because of the fact that obviously today, like 10 carries for 28 yards just kind of drives home your running back point. And I think for the consideration of triplets, I had Lonnie Hillman there as the running back. Monty Ball was not back yet, and apparently